Hey everyone, it's B. Good afternoon, good day. Today we're doing something a little bit different. We are actually talking about the St. Albans Sanatorium today. So this is part one of a two-part series of videos, set of videos, and it's not really scripted. I'm not really reading anything. I'm just kind of like telling you guys about St. Albans Sanatorium. This part one is more about the history. You'll get to see a lot of video footage that I have of St. Albans. You'll see me walking through, just taking video, and you'll see what it looks like and really how it looks today. I believe I took one little shot of like a photo from a long time ago. I'll put it in here if I can find it. But a long time ago, it used to look very gorgeous, and some parts of the building are still very, very beautiful. So it was essentially, okay, let's start from the beginning, shall we? Let's start from the very, very beginning. St. Albans Sanatorium is one of the most active locations on the East Coast for ghost sightings. And to understand why that is, let's start with its history, shall we? So, in the early 1900s, St. Albans was built not originally as a sanatorium. It's referred to as a sanatorium because that's what it was for the longest part of its life. Even to this day, there are people alive that were actually patients in St. Albans Sanatorium. So, in fact, one of the person that owns St. Albans used to be a patient there, and we'll get to that story at the end. But in the 1900s, very, very early on, St. Albans was a boys' school. It was a boys' school, and it's located in Radford, Virginia. And what began a lot of creepiness and a lot of spooky stuff, even during that time when there was just, the boys' school was essentially from, if you think of it in American high school and middle school terms, it was from 7th, 8th grade all the way up to 12th grade. And even back then, there was sightings of, ghosts and things like that. And a lot of people attribute that to, in the 1700s, there was a lot of Native American battles with colonies, and different colonialists had died, and actually some people were even held for ransom back then. One of them was Mary Draper Ingalls. She was taken prisoner in Sanatorium by the Shawnee, and before she was taken prisoner, she actually watched her mother and her sister-in-law's baby killed. She saw them, and she said that one of them just literally picked up the baby and just, smashed its head against the side of the cabin that they were in, and that her mother was scalped and tomahawked to death. So there's a lot of that sort of history, which is very, very tragic. And then in the late 1800s is when it was built. So St. Albans Sanatorium was constructed in that area in 1892, and it was originally, like I said, it took several years for it to be completely built. It's absolutely gorgeous. It's actually kind of like a set of three buildings, if you think of it as like one very large rectangular Victorian building with almost a wraparound porch, and then kind of like a longer, short rectangular building that was kind of like a walkway, and there was several other things there. And then the last part was a building not quite as big as the big square one that had the porch. It still had a porch, but it was more for like not so much the boys. It was more for like the work folk and like the headmaster and the teachers if they needed to stay there. So if you think of it like that, it's kind of like this very large, very gorgeous compound that was heavily influenced. It had a lot of colonial influence, as well as a lot of Victorian styles to it. So the whole point of it was going to be a Lutheran boys' school. George W. Miles is the guy who was the first headmaster, as I believe he was the only headmaster. And so it was only open for literally 14 years, I think. So, no, not even that long. No, it had to have been 14 years. Yeah, I believe so. It was right around there, 14 years or so. And then it was closed for 6 to 8 years. And John C. King bought it in 1916 and wanted to make it into the first well-known, top-notch hospital. He was very, very disappointed with other, what they call lunatic asylums. He was very disappointed in them and how they were not, the patients weren't treated well and they were not well accommodated. Now, not to say that St. Albans didn't do crazy stuff. They didn't do lobotomies, but they still did, in fact, shock their patients. And they didn't just shock them like in the idea of like electricity shocks. Sometimes they would put them into hydrotherapy shocks, meaning like they would submerge the person's body in ice cold water for, nearly hours at a time, just to put them into that sort of, hypothermia shock. And then not only that, but they'd also put them into insulin shock, just in order to give their system a jolt, in the same sense of giving them an electric shock, trying to, make it better by resetting the system, so to say. So even though they still did those things at St. Albans, it was under John C. King, Dr. John C. King. He was much more accommodating for his patients. They were very well treated. It was just like very much a very nice place for patients to stay, and most of them would stay their entire lives. And there was a very wide range of psychiatric patients there. Some would be there some women would be there for what we call hysteria, which isn't even a thing. And then some people would actually be there, like schizophrenics and very violent people. So they did have the hydrotherapy, and they did have the electroconvulsive therapy and the insulin coma therapy. But beside those, they didn't really have very much. They do call one of the bathrooms where people were given hydrotherapy sessions, quote unquote hydrotherapy, the suicide bathroom. So there's a lot of interesting rooms that you would see in the sanatorium that you wouldn't normally see like at a typical psychiatric hospital. For instance, there's a very large bowling alley. I'll put some pictures of what I took. It was not, it was not easy to get some footage of that because it was very, very dark when we went, but I'll put that in here. There is rumored to be a young girl that is the young daughter of one of the hospital patients there. Her name was Allie, and she tends to stay in the bowling alley. And they used to think that her name, for some reason, was spelled Alley, and it's not. It's Allie like you would normally spell it, Allie. But yes, so there was that. And then there was a woman, Gina Renee Hall, who they've said that haunts the bowling alley specifically as well. I don't know if she used to be a patient or if she just came and visited someone that was living there for quite a while, but she ended up being murdered on June 28th, 1980, right along the road that leads to St. Albans. So after this, in the 1990s, it was no longer a sanatorium. It was given up, and the Carillion Health System actually bought it in the 1990s. But they, for some reason, it's unknown and not stated anywhere, why they vacated the property. But in 2003, they were nowhere to be found. And then after that, for I guess about 5-6 years, there was no one there. It was abandoned. And it was the site of a lot of theft, vandalism. So if you see any of that in any of the video footage, there's a lot of graffiti because I guess college kids just think it's cool to break into an abandoned place and instead of respecting it, just completely ruin the walls by punching them or putting graffiti on them or putting graffiti on the floor or splashing fake blood everywhere. It's just a little ridiculous, but sorry if you end up seeing any of that. Hopefully you don't. So, essentially, after that, Tim Gregory, who used to be a patient at the hospital, he now owns it, and he's now renovating the building, and he's trying to transform it into a research and enlightenment center. And so what he's doing is every year they have kind of like a Halloween extravaganza, and then they welcome people to come and actually investigate the place. And it's very interesting. You'll get to see the part 2 of this. I hope you really like it. It's going to be really interesting. You'll get to see me and Cricket's take on this. You'll meet Cricket in the next part. But that's kind of like the history of St. Albans. It's a very beautiful place. The graffiti and like a lot of the structural damage makes me sad, but you'll notice it's still beautiful, and I'm really excited, and I'm sure Cricket is really excited to share with you our experience of what we expected and what ended up actually happening. So see you in the next video. Bye.